Another new feature in CS5 is better noise reduction inside of Camera Raw. And with the cameras that we have today, especially a lot of the newer DSLR cameras, and even a lot of the point and shoot cameras, we're able to shoot at these very high ISOs and get good quality, but there's still noise. Okay, there's less noise than there used to be, which actually is what makes the file usable. And because there's less noise, we can bring them back to what I consider are very usable and even a very good state with some new controls that we have here. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here. Let's zoom in on the background. And if you look around, you can kind of see it. I know it's always a little bit hard to see it in video because things kind of get blurred. But if you look through this background, you should see there's two things. There's a graininess to it, and there's red, green, and blue specks all throughout it. That's color noise. All right. I don't think Camera Raw was ever that bad at color noise removal. I actually think it did pretty good, but that has continued. It's even gotten a little bit better. You would take, and this is over in your detail panel in Camera Raw, you would take your color noise slider and you'd bring it up until that color noise is gone. So this is before, and that's after. Okay, so we'll kind of bring it up a little bit more here. So our color noise is pretty much gone. When it's gone, you don't have to bring the slider up more, because when it's gone, bringing the slider up more doesn't make it more gone or anything like that. It's already gone, so don't worry about that. Once you're there, what you're looking to do is retain some of the detail, because what can happen is when the slider's down low, you have your color noise, but your edges might have color too. As you increase that slider, sometimes Camera Raw will go in there and remove color from the edges. And that's where you got to kind of be a little bit careful that you're not desaturating some of your edges too much. So when I increase the color detail, let's bring it all the way down to the left. All right, and then start to crank it up to the right here. And what you're going to see is that some of these edges start to retain a little bit more of their color. All right, or some of these edges retain more of their color when it's low. When I crank it up, it starts to remove some of the color from the edges, and it could just make them a little bit unsaturated. It just depends on the photo. Sometimes you can get away with the very low settings. Sometimes you got to crank it up, and you might have a little bit of that undersaturated type of an edge. It is going to vary for each photo, but just understand that when you're working with this color detail slider, you're pretty much looking at those edges and trying to get some of that color detail back in there. Now, the big area, at least for me, what I think is the big area is luminance. All right, so that's where I've always kind of felt Camera Raw was lacking a little bit. And luminance noise is now all this greeniness that we're left with. We got rid of the color noise, but we have what's called luminance noise. So I'm going to start to increase this setting. And if I take it way up, you'll see a big difference. So you can see that, and then this would be before. All right, so obviously, when I crank up luminance noise, I don't want to go too high because it starts to blur the edges. And that's the key here, is you don't want to blur the edges. So we're going to bring it down low, and we're going to start to bring it up just high enough to where it makes that graininess look like it starts to disappear. All right, we can kind of scan around the photo here and just get a feel for it. All right, again, this was before. This is after. So I'm able to get rid of a lot of that graininess. All right, let's just kind of check out a couple other areas. So graininess is mostly gone. And then what we have is detail. So when the detail is very low, what's happening is we're letting the luminance slider do all the work, and we're not trying to preserve any details. As I increase the detail slider, I'm now saying, I want you to try to preserve some of the details. What's the downside of this? The downside of this are these little artifacts. And again, I realize they may be a little bit hard to see in video, but you'll start to see a little bit of artifacting here and there. Let me bring it all the way low, and let me crank it up. And you'll start to you see some edges really start to come in, but you also see just a few artifacts. For me, this is acceptable because I want to start to bring back some of that detail. But again, it's different for every photo. And then contrast is, it's looking at a lot of the edges, and it's either going to make them a little bit more dull, or it's going to make them a little bit more snappier. It's going to have a little bit of a dark edge or a little bit of a bright edge. Again, each slider comes with a little bit of a downside, where in this example, the contrast works pretty good. If you had something with a lot of details in there, it could almost make it look noisy again, because now you're going into a lot of these fine little edges and you're adding contrast into them. And in the end, that could work against you when you're trying to remove the noise from the photo. But here's the thing. You've got to play with it. The best thing to do is just understand color noise, gets rid of the color stuff, luminance, gets rid of the grainy stuff, and then you start to just tweak it and work with it here, because it will blur the photo a little bit, but you can come back in here with some of these sliders and you can start to bring back a lot of those edge details that you could lose while you're trying to remove that noise. And that's the whole purpose of this stuff, is it's getting rid of the noise while trying to still give you an acceptable photo. Okay, any program can get rid of noise and just blur the living daylights out of the photo. The problem is, and why CS5 has gotten so much better, is that we can get rid of the noise really well, and we still have a very good, acceptable photo in the end.